Welcome back to the channel. Glad to have you here. And with the release of the Monster Hunter Stories 3 demo or trial version, I've gone into it, I've looked at it, played a couple hours of it now, and I just wanted to go over a couple things that stood out to me. Some things that they have gone over, that they've touched on in the past, and other things that I feel like haven't been talked about enough by people of changes to the new game, to Stories 3, from Stories 1 and 2. Very much a departure from 1 and 2. If you were thinking this was going to be the same kind of game, I do believe you're going to be a little bit wrong there. While the core does seem to be the same, there are a lot of changes. So just real quick, I've got a quick list here for you of changes that I found just at the beginning of the game. There's probably going to be a ton more as we go through, as we play more, especially once we get the full release out and get our hands on that. Not to mention, as the game moves on, some of these things may change one way or another. Where you might have access to something now, might get taken away, or you might not have access to something and you might get it. We will have to see how that flushes out once the demo is not the only thing we have. But the list. Skill usage is no longer tied to your kinship gauge like in the older titles. So in Stories 1 and 2, your kinship gauge rises as you do attacks against the enemy monster. Doing double attacks or winning head-to-head straight up against the enemy monster will give you more kinship gauge. Also, just attacking the enemy monster without being attacked back will also give you a slight boost in kinship gauge in the old games. In the new game, in Stories 3, the kinship gauge is still there, but it's not tied to your skills that you use for the weapons. So if you wanted to do like a meteor swing with the hammer, I think it's called Meteor Swing, where it does heavy part damage to the monster for whatever part you pick. That does not then get subtracted from your kinship gauge. So it costs 30 points. In the first two games, it would have been 30 points off your kinship gauge. Not the case anymore. In the new one, you have a stamina gauge, which is used for the skill attacks. So you start off with a set amount of stamina. As you do regular attacks, you gain a slight amount of stamina each turn. And then when you use your skilled attacks or your special attacks, it gets taken off of there. So like I said, it stays completely separate from your kinship gauge. Your kinship gauge is still used for your ultimate attack with your monster. But it's not being drained if you want to use a skill. Kinship gauge does not lose charge when swapping to a new monster. So if you swap back to that monster later, you still have what you built up in kinship gauge from earlier on in the fight. Now, I am not saying that it transfers from one monster to another. That's not what happens. What happens is, in the old games, when you would swap monsters, say you had full kinship gauge on a Rathalos, and you swapped out for whatever reason to a Legiacris, that full kinship gauge is lost. You start if you pull Rathalos back out, the very next turn, after swapping them initially, you have a base level kinship amount in your gauge. You do not have a full kinship gauge anymore. It gets wiped. In the new game, that doesn't happen. It stays. But it does not transfer between monsters. So there's that. But that does, give you some flexibility to swap out monsters here and there and not have to worry about losing kinship, which is a really good way to get some damage in. Health and hearts get refilled after you exit a fight, win or lose. So you win a fight, you take 2 hearts, you lose 2 hearts in a fight, as soon as that fight's over, the game gives you your hearts back. You do not lose them. Also heals you up. Now, whether or not that changes, that's one that I think might change as the game goes on. But currently, that's how it is. We'll see how that pans out going forward. Player characters can now swim across water, although it's very slow. You can swim across water. You do not need a monster to do that anymore. Now, you can only get up at certain spots. You have to have a, just like in the old games, you have to have something that's low enough to the water that you can get up. You can't just climb rocks. You can also not call a monster that is not a swimming monster to your rescue during that time that you're in the water. So when you're in the water, until you get out, you cannot use any monsters other than swimming monsters. Monster dens are one area now, rather than a series of caverns that lead to a nest. So you just go into a monster den and you're instantly in this like round, kind of like arena. Everyone I've seen so far has looked the same basically, except for the fact that they can have more than one nest in there. So you go in, there's just a nest near the center of it. You start digging for an egg. You might have a monster come, knocking. You might not. But you don't have to go through caverns anymore. Again, that might change. I don't know. Something we'll have to see when we get later into the game after the demo. Like I said, nests, dens have multiple nests in them. And you're also not required to leave the den with the egg. You can stay in the den. So all you have to do is get close to the entrance of the den, and the egg gets put in your inventory, and then you can run back. Whether you want to leave the den or run back into the den, you can do either or. You are no longer restricted to low star monsters at the beginning of the game. So at the beginning of the game, in the first area, normally you'd have like a 1-star or 2-star monsters. So something like Velocidrome, Yinkutku. That's what we've seen in the earlier games here. What we're seeing in this one now is you can get stuff like Plasioth, Green Plasioth, Nursilla. There is Yinkutku as well. There's, Velocidrome as well. But you can get those higher level monsters. I got all the way up to a 5-star monster from a gold den. So rare monster dens can give you some really good monsters. Even the normal monster dens can give you some good monsters. But I've got all the way up to a 5-star in the first area. Within playing the game for under 2 hours, I had a 5-star monster. So that's a lot different than the old games, where you'd have one, maybe a 2-star monster in the first area. Plasioth and Nursilla, like I said, are no longer mid to late game monsters. They're in the immediate opening area. Although they are a little weird here. We'll get to that. But again, they are something that you will see early on rather than later. There is no true flying in the game, but rather gliding between pillars of wind that give you lift. So you start off with Rathalos when you get control, and you can jump on Rathalos and go quote-unquote fly. But from all I've tried, you cannot gain altitude other than these wind pillars, these pillars of wind that will allow you to be pushed up in the air, and then you glide and slowly, come down. So that's not exactly a change that I like, but it is what it is. At least you get to start, with the flight right from the beginning rather than have to wait. You do not seem to have access to Sword and Shield either. I stuttered there for a second. So no Sword and Shield, from what I can tell, which is a long-running staple in these games. It has been swapped out for Longsword. We knew we were getting Longsword. As far as I'm aware, I didn't know we were getting rid of Sword and Shield. I thought we were adding Longsword and maybe some other stuff, but it looks like Sword and Shield is out, Longsword in, so have fun with that if you're Longsword mains. If you like Sword and Shield, that's very unfortunate. At least initially, Gunlance seems to be on par damage-wise with Bow, unlike in previous entries. If you watch the Nuzlocke series that I put out, that ended yesterday, actually. The story was over yesterday. Perfect timing. But we initially started playing with Gunlance rather than Bow, and we found out very quickly that Gunlance was underpowered compared to Bow. Bow just seemed to do a good bit more damage, so we ended up going with Bow. It also seemed to have a lot more options. But in the new one, it does seem here that Gunlance is on par power-wise with the Bow, at least from what we found so far. We'll see if that scaling continues, but again, that'll have to wait. Graphically, this is night and day better than the previous titles, with a noticeable jump in both detail and the shading that you get. So there's a lot more shading, there's a lot more color diversity. So like the blue stripe that is on the back of Rathalos' tail, that is not a solid blue stripe anymore. You do have different pigments in there. Makes it look a lot better. You have a lot more finer detail in the monsters and everything. So again, graphically, we did take a very, very good jump. Not to mention, you know, this is looking like a more mature game, so it bodes very well in those aspects. Updated and more dynamic menu system has been given to us that give better information than previous titles, such as you have bar graphs for speed of a monster, attack of a monster, defense, stuff like that. You can see what it's weak to as far as, you know, ailments. Is it weak to paralysis? Is it weak to an element like ice? You know, what have you. That's all in the menus now. You don't have to, you know, fuss around with it. You could see, you know, weaknesses in the old game, but it's all in one spot now. So much easier to get to, and it has more information than the old game. That is Stories 1 and 2. No more guessing which monsters and monster parts are weak to which weapon types. The game straight up tells you. First monster you fight will be a Velocipede, and it'll just straight up tell you what is effective and what's not. If you just look at the overlay, it's going to tell you with every monster I've fought so far what is and isn't effective. That might be because we are in our hometown, so, you know, it might be a story beat, but it's hard to tell. It seems like the game's just going to more or less take that kind of stuff out of your hands and just tell you straight up what you need to use. No more need to search around the map for monster dens or to check if the dens are rare dens. Everything is shown on the map for you. This even includes different levels of the map. So if you have a top level and a bottom level of a map, like one level would be like underground or something, the game shows you what is on each level. You can cycle between those levels. Again, another one that I'm not super fond of. This one and the last one is like but at least we don't have to worry about looking for, you know, going all over maps to look for rare dens. You can literally pop in a map and pop out again if you need to. Excuse me. You can now fight over-leveled monsters. There are normal monsters which have no indicator above their head. There are slightly higher level monsters that have a yellow indicator above their head. And there are substantially higher level monsters that have a red indicator over their head. As a side note here, the red indicator, those monsters will one-shot you. from testing I've done. Every time I've screwed up a move, or they're doing technical, and I for some reason pick speed, not paying attention, or I don't know what it's moving to, then you're getting one shot. Straight up one shot. You just lost a heart. So they do hit hard. The red indicated monsters, the substantially higher level monsters, hit like a freight train. The yellow indicator are not bad. Okay, they are not a substantial challenge, but they are more challenging than the normals. But you can easily defeat them. They're not that bad. The red ones, though, you probably want to stay away from, at least initially, and go from there. The only other thing that I have that I didn't put on my list here is you now have a different knockdown system. So when you wear out a wyvern, you will knock them down, and you have the option of either A, letting them get knocked down, and you get a free turn while they are knocked down to either heal or attack them, what have you. Oh, how'd you yawn? Or you can do, you can press Y or triangle on PlayStation. It's the top face button, basically, is what we're pressing here. And every one of you and your teammates will attack the monster for massive amounts of damage. Okay, you can range anywhere from around 100 hits, because each attack by every one of you is a multi-hit, essentially. So you can range anywhere from about 100 hits, and I've got over 200 hits already. And you just chunk the monster's health. Along with that, when you go to attack a monster, if you look at the bar at their part gauge, so when you go to attack a Velocidrome, there's a bar for its head. Okay? That's its part gauge. When you are about to attack them, before you select the attack and you're just hovering over where you want to attack, it will show you how much damage you're going to do to that part. And that is true for your kinship attacks as well. So that's a nice handy little feature that you can use to your benefit there if you're, trying to break a part that you know is going to topple. So like in Stories 2, if you attack the legs of a Diablos, if you break the legs, the Diablos falls over. It's a guaranteed topple every time. So if you have one of those, and you look, and the monster is not attacking anyone particularly, which means it's probably going to be doing either A, a power-up, or B, it's going to be attacking with a skill move, which basically doesn't count as a head-to-head, then you can actually look at that bar and tell, can I hit him for enough to break this to knock him down? And if I can, it might be worth doing that to get the knockdown, and it just totally voids their actual attack anyways then. Speaking of voiding attacks, you still do have the ability to void out other monster attacks towards your team if you have a partner, like another person with their Monstie with you, and it's 4 against the monster. Say the monster is attacking you. If your partner does a kinship skill, okay, so the full kinship attack, if that happens, the monster will not attack. Again, that could be something that changes, but that is how it's working currently, which is also how we saw it in previous titles. So those are all the little intricacies that I've found so far. There's a lot of other stuff going on. There's stuff that I decided not to include here, which is kind of obvious stuff. A lot of stuff that they've gone over I did go over some stuff in this that they had touched on, but it is stuff that I want to make sure that people knew about. Whereas some other stuff, it's kind of small and you don't need to really worry about it. Such as you can still see subquests on the map. Okay, you can see them in the old ones, you can see them in the new ones. There's still that blue color. They're round instead of a square bubble now, but they're still there. Stuff like that. How to ride a monster, still the same. How to use a monster's ability, like flying or climbing a wall, still the same. So that kind of stuff I didn't touch on. But, this stuff that is heavily different than the old game, or it is a return to the old, such as like Poogie farming or Poogie tracking. You can find Poogies again, you can collect Poogies. I wanted to make sure I talked to everybody about that and put that out there so it's known. But thank you so much for watching. If you found something that you think should be known that I did not talk about here, again, it's early, it's only a demo. We'll see, what little stuff else we can find in here. But if you find anything, please leave it in the comments. Let me know about it. If you have any questions, again, leave a comment. If you did like the video, please consider liking, subscribing, leaving a comment, like I just said. Me much appreciated. And you guys have a good day. Bye.